to another live episode of the Buckeye Talk show. I am Stephen Means, that is Stefan Krajisnik, and that is Andrew Gillis. And there's been a lot of things that have happened this week. Some of them are not done happening. And if one of those important things happens while we're in the middle of that live show, we will acknowledge it. The person who writes the stories for that will then leave the live show for a decent amount of time, do what he needs to do, and then he will rejoin us. If you're on this live show, you know who I'm talking about. I don't even need to say the name at this point. But Ohio State does have an important game on Saturday. They're playing the Big Ten championship game for the first time since 2020. It's Ohio State. It's Indiana. It's number one versus number two. As you can see, Brendan, once again, with the great graphics. This is better than what ESPN does. I'm just going to say that. It's better than what ESPN does. What? You can't prove – I mean, you can't prove me wrong. Right? This is all an opinion at the end of the day. This is better than what ESPN does. Ohio State, Indiana, Hoosiers, Buckeyes. You got a Heisman Trophy on the line. You don't have Big Ten awards on the line, though, Stefan, because that would make too much sense. I don't know. Should they have waited? Why couldn't we have waited a week to do the awards?
I don't know. I'm fine with the Big Ten awards being exclusive to regular season. Like, these are the regular season awards.
But, like, I don't know. All the stats are the same. Gillis, could we have waited a week?
No, because we've decided that there need to be 27 teams in each conference now, and only 2 of them get to play in a conference championship game. So, I don't know. There are good players that aren't playing this weekend. So, I'm fine with making sure that they are not overshadowed by teams that – they maybe have just a dude who's playing, and that matters. So I'm fine with it. It's cool.
I think they should wait, especially when 2 of the guys who are up for the biggest award on offense get to play each other on Saturday. But I guess I'll stand alone on that hill. Ohio State, Indiana. Some fun facts for you. Ohio State is 5-1 in the Big Ten championship game since its existence, with wins over Wisconsin and Northwestern. They beat Wisconsin 3 times. They beat Northwestern 2 times. Their one loss came to Michigan State in their first time playing in that game in 2013. This is also a chance to win their 40th Big Ten title overall. Indiana has not won the Big Ten since, Stefan, you're an alum. Do you know the answer?
67.
Good for you.
45, I think, is the only other one.
Hey.
That was well before Big Ten championship games, though.
Yeah, it was. Do you know, Andrew, the last time Indiana beat Ohio State?
Nope. Nope. Sorry.
You want to take a guess? I don't know.
Never? Is it never?
Stefan, you want to take a guess?
1988.
1988.
Ooh.
We just told you Indiana won 2 Big Ten titles. You think they'd never beat Ohio State?
Maybe they never played.
2 teams that have been in the what?
Maybe they didn't play those years.
Yeah, back when they were playing conference games against Oregon and UCLA.
Yeah,
they couldn't schedule Indiana.
Yeah, the way that God intended.
The way that God intended. Correct. All right, Big Ten Live show. As we did last week, we'll be previewing the game. We'll also have some big picture conversations. And we're going to start with those big picture conversations about the Big Ten this year. There are 3 teams expected to make the college football playoff this year. That's one less than that made it last year. Stefan, describe what the Big Ten conference was in 2025 in 5 words or less.
Top heavy.
Dang it.
I went with 2 words there. It was very top heavy because I think what you have with Ohio State and Indiana and Oregon, obviously the standings tell you have 3 of the 5 best teams in the country, but I do think all 3 of those teams, are national contenders to some extent, right? I think a team like Oregon could maybe benefit from a decent draw in the playoff. Indiana and Ohio State, I think, have proven themselves, at least to this point, to be the 2 best teams in the country. It was top heavy, and that's not necessarily what I expected this year. I thought the conference was going to be pretty deep in the sense of legitimate playoff worthy teams, and then maybe there would be a drop off, right? Like I thought Purdue would maybe take a step forward, but still not be any good. Wisconsin would take a step forward, but still not be any good. But I thought even past Ohio State and Oregon that, obviously Penn State was a top 2 preseason team. I predicted that Michigan was going to make the playoff this year, and they didn't do that. USC kind of was a bit of a disappointment this year to some extent. Indiana, I guess, to some extent, has been a bit of a surprise. They weren't really everyone kind of expected a step back, and they actually took a step forward this year. So I don't know. I thought there was going to be, 6 or 7 teams that we could seriously talk about as contenders, whether that be as national championship contenders or playoff contenders. And by the time you got to, November, the image became pretty clear that unless Michigan upset Ohio State, the Big Ten was probably only going to get 3 teams into the playoff. And that's kind of disappointing. So, we've had the discussions in the past, so we don't need to go back through it again too much, just comparing the conference to the SEC. The SEC was deeper this year in the sense that they had more teams that were probably in that playoff conversation, but they also had more teams that were in that conversation of like number 3 to number 12, and never really had, teams that have solidified themselves as like true national title contenders. I think Georgia's maybe separated from the bunch a little bit here later, but it's just been weird because the Big Ten has 2 or 3 best teams in the country, and then it feels like the next like 7 best teams, with the exception of Notre Dame, are teams from the SEC, and then you toss in Texas Tech and wherever you think Miami stands too. But very odd. I thought it was going to be deeper, and turns out it was a pretty top-heavy league this year.
Top-heavy was the number one word phrase on my list, and I wasn't going to go first in this, so I knew it was going to get taken. I just thought I had some time. Gillis, describe the Big Ten in 2025, 5 words or less.
Penn State ruined it because look at the conference, and I'm going to just break some news for you. Iowa went 8-4. Does that seem out of the ordinary for Iowa to go 8-4? Maryland, they had a great September, and then they stunk the rest of the year. Is anybody surprised by that? Is anybody surprised that Purdue was bad, that Michigan State was bad, that Rutgers was barely a bowl team, UCLA 3-9, Northwestern 6-6, Nebraska? Like, go look at the ranking, go look at the records, and you're like, that kind of makes some sense. USC went 9-3, Michigan went 9-3, Iowa 8-4, like I mentioned, Washington, Illinois 8-4. I think this is kind of what you expected. I think you thought Indiana was going to be pretty good. I think Indiana is better than people thought, right? I think, we talked about it going into the year of like, wow, if Indiana goes 9-3, that's still a really successful 2-year run for them because they went to the playoff last year and now they're 9-3. And wow, what good news for Curt Cignetti. But that changes things, right? Like when you go 12-0, I think everybody knew Ohio State was going to be good. I think there's some wiggle room here, kind of like you knew Ohio State was going to be good. People nationally and maybe even us or fans of this team maybe didn't think they were going to be this good, like bordering on historic good. Oregon, I think people were kind of aware that they were going to be pretty good, and then everything else just kind of fell into place except for Penn State. Like you guys say top heavy, it's not unreasonable to imagine a scenario where it's even more top heavy, where you have a 10-2, 11-1 Penn State team with, maybe even they lose to Indiana and Ohio State, but they're able to win one of those games against Oregon, Indiana, and Ohio State. And maybe that changes their fortunes, right? Like we talked about it before, like, hey, if Penn State beat Oregon, what record do they finish at? And where do they finish? And maybe the answer is just 10-2 because you don't think they're beating Indiana or Ohio State. But 10-2 with a win over Oregon means that you would have had 4 10-win teams in the Big Ten. I think everything kind of went as we expected it to go, give or take. Well, this team was maybe a game or 2 worse. Hey, this team was maybe a game or so better. But Penn State being 6-6 and really just kind of collapsing like that, I think really kind of changed the outlook of the conference because as we do this now, Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon are all going to make the playoff. That's it. And I think Penn State was maybe the team that everybody thought could be that 4th team. I think we all predicted them to make the playoff, if I'm not mistaken. I think we all had them in the playoff. I think some of us had, like Stefan said, Michigan. I don't think anybody had USC, but like we all kind of thought Penn State was going to be there, and they weren't. So Penn State changed, I think, the direction of this conference for 2025 because they stunk.
Entertaining, but disappointing. And that's not just about the fact that Penn State was the preseason Big Ten favorite and preseason number 2 team in the country. Like, Indiana is great. The fact that they built on last year is great. The fact that Ohio State has been the epitome of like, we don't rebuild, reload, that entire concept this year. And now we're getting ready to start talking about a game that's between the number 1 and number 2 teams in the country, as the only 2 undefeated teams left in the country. I think it's pretty cool. I think it is pretty cool that in back-to-back years, the remaining undefeated team left was the Big Ten champion. I think that's pretty cool because Oregon was obviously undefeated going into the college football playoff last year. Penn State's Penn State. But I also think Wisconsin, that's a little bit disappointing that Luke Fickell hasn't taken another step. I think Rutgers is a little disappointing that they haven't taken the next step. I think Maryland being good in September, but also being in multiple 4-quarter games late into October, but then like falling apart in the 4th quarter is very disappointing, even if the game itself that they played in was interesting. I think UCLA, I think that's disappointing that 3 games into Deshaun Foster's second year as a head coach, it's already like, we're done with this. And it got entertaining right after that with some of the stuff they pulled off. Northwestern, I think, is fun. That's entertaining. There's nothing disappointing about that. I think Nebraska is a bit of a disappointment in that 5-star quarterback in year 2 doesn't take a step. I mean, the same thing happened with Florida and DJ Lagway. And so what does that mean for Michigan next year when they're in a similar position of they started a true freshman 5-star recruit and now they're expecting him to take a step? Like, I don't know. There's no proof of concept yet that guy's going to take a step. I think Michigan, this is an Ohio State podcast. So from the Ohio State perspective, what happened last Saturday was amazing. To see Ohio State finally get that monkey off of its back and beat Michigan at Michigan and really kind of do it in a similar environment to how it started, in the snow, on the road, on the ground, after establishing the pass first. But it's also disappointing that Michigan just like Michigan doesn't have any marquee wins this year. And also what Michigan did during the game and after the game was a little pathetic. So that's disappointing. And I'm not just saying that because it's an Ohio State podcast. I'm saying that because that was pathetic. Iowa, to Gillis's point, they're not disappointing. They're not great. They're just, what was it where we used? Whelming?
They're appointing and whelming.
Yeah, they're just what they are. So that's fine. They did what they were supposed to do. I think Illinois, that's a disappointment for a team who, when they walked into their first ranked game of the season, they were a top 10 team. And they got smacked. And they never really got back off the mat. Minnesota, I think PJ Fleck's doing a fine job. But it's just like they just exist. I think they're like Iowa, but they don't play the way Iowa goes. But they're 7-5. I think Washington is, quite frankly, a bit of a disappointment. And not because it's Jed Fisher's second year and they went, 8-4 this year, but because I felt like every time we were ready to highlight Washington, they dropped the ball. Whether it was the Ohio State game or they had games later in the year where it felt like as soon as somebody was yelling at me on Twitter about why Washington wasn't ranked, they would play it away on Saturday that would go, that's why Washington isn't ranked. And so that's what I think created this top heaviness that we're seeing, Stefan, is, Gillis, Penn State's the extreme version of that because they were the preseason number 2 team, preseason Big Ten favorite, and they finished the year barely being bowl eligible and under 500 in Big Ten play, and they fired their head coach. Yeah, they are the extreme of that, but I thought the Big Ten had a chance to really take a step as a conference this year in terms of the parity in the conference, and what ended up happening was they've got 2 elite teams, 1 really good playoff team, and a very large lower class. And I think you just would have rather seen – I think I'd still rather be that because, I mean, how many teams in the SEC do you think can realistically win a national championship versus the Big Ten, right? But I just think in terms of the value of, like, watching a 9-game conference schedule, I just don't think the Big Ten some of the teams who should have taken steps this year took the step that they needed to take. So be better.
I think Washington was definitely the best example of that. It's just like every time, like there was the game at Michigan, there was you mentioned the Ohio State game. They played Oregon late in the year. It's like every time you wanted to get yourself to buy in, it was disappointment. So, and I think for Illinois too, it wasn't even just the games that they lost. It was just the Wisconsin game was a game that they lost. That's just like pathetic. But their season was kind of over at that point. Mm-hmm. It was just the way they played against Ohio State, against Indiana, where they got on the field with these teams, and something looked off, right?
Yeah.
And it looked like they just, once you threw a couple of punches, they couldn't recover. Obviously, a great win for them against USC, early in the year, but yeah, it was a very strange year in the Big Ten, because every time you felt that like maybe a team was going to emerge, because even like I think about late October, early November, when we start getting those first playoff rankings, and you see Iowa like pop up they were like number 20. Number 19, something like that. And you're like, all right, like the committee they actually kind of respect Iowa. And here's this big matchup with Oregon, and they looked the part. They played well, and then just couldn't really do much with their season from there. So yeah, every time I felt like a team had an opportunity, it went by the wayside.
It like teams just didn't take, I think, the step that you maybe wanted them to take, and I think that's probably that's kind of in another way what you're saying. Like USC went 9-3, but they played Notre Dame and they lost by 10, and Notre Dame rushed for 1,000,000 yards that game. They kind of got manhandled in the trenches. They lost to Oregon.
USC might be the exception for me, just because like they have to play Notre Dame every year. I think in Big Ten play they were pretty quality, but
they also got handled by Oregon. Oregon was kind of in control of that game the whole way, and it's just like you would have thought that a Lincoln Riley team would maybe take that step. Like Michigan, they technically did take a step. Like they went from 7-5 to 9-3. They had a really young team, but like you said it, like they played Oklahoma and they got embarrassed. And then they played USC and they got embarrassed. And they played Ohio State and they got embarrassed. Like they're the three best teams that they played, they got handily beaten. It's just like Illinois, I think we were kind of hypothesizing, like, talk to your friends about playoff Illinois before the year and Luke Altmaier and this whole thing. And they went 8-4. And like, I'm looking at it now. It's just Washington didn't take that step that maybe you would have wanted. Illinois didn't take that step. Penn State took 500 steps back. Like the step forward for Penn State would have been beating Oregon, beating Indiana, or beating Ohio State. And not only did they do none of those things, they couldn't even beat UCLA. So it's like teams just had that opportunity to really just take that step, and then they kind of just fell apart. They kind of didn't.
Meanwhile, at the top again, number 1 versus number 2, right? I think if you're going to be top heavy, Stefan, this is probably how you want to be top heavy, right? Yeah. So at least it's like, we are top heavy, but the 2 teams at the top are the 2 best teams in the country, which you can use to explain why they are so top heavy and why there's such a gap between them and everybody else. And that starts with Ohio State, and I think this is now a intriguing question at a time when I know there are probably people in the chat. I know there are people in the text 614-350-3315, 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that, who are probably freaking out about the fact that Brian Hartline is leaving, who are freaking out about the fact that Christian Henry Jr., a guy who's been committed here for 2 years, is all of a sudden, because of the Hartline decision, because everything is a negotiation at the end of the day, we're not sure what's going to happen here. It does sound like it's an Ohio State Oregon race with like Texas trying to like butt itself in. You know that Family Guy meme where they're all like putting their hands in, and then the one guy with the wood hand tries to come in and then they scoot him out. Texas is the guy with the wood hand that they're trying to scoot out. It's like, this is not, mind your business. Stop trying to third wheel on Big Ten conversations. This does not concern you, Texas, and we'll see what happens with Chris Henry Jr. Maybe that happens while we're on this podcast and you get our live reactions to it. Or maybe it happens. I mean, it doesn't have to happen on Thursday either. It can happen Friday, right? He has all week to do this. As long as it's done this week, he's fine because he's early enrolling regardless of where he goes. Does Ohio State have to beat Indiana on Saturday to be the clear number 1 team in the Big Ten? And this is not a number 1 in the Big Ten for the standings, but a conversation about the bigger picture of where the Big Ten is headed right now.
For this season, Yeah, I think so. And going into the playoff, yeah, I think so, because the conversations that we've had about Ohio State, about how they're the only team in college football that looks kind of unbeatable and they look complete and all this and that. I think a loss to Indiana would poke some holes, right? And I think it would kind of shift the conversation to whatever everything Indiana has done this year and how good they would look. I think that they would be the clear number one this year. Now, what I will add on top of that is I'm not talking about betting odds. I think going into the college football playoff, Ohio State would probably still be, the betting favorite to win it all, right? They're a team that's done it before. They're a team with a lot of talent. To suggest that just because Indiana beat them once means that they can beat them again if they were to meet in the national championship, all of that would probably be wrong to assume, right? I think Ohio State would probably remain the betting favorite, but I think Indiana at 13-0 with wins against Oregon on the road, Iowa on the road, Penn State on the road, Ohio State on a neutral site. I think Indiana would probably be the clear number one at that point, and would be, kind of looked at as a team that you got to beat, right? They're the team that beat the unbeatable. So I think there is a lot for Ohio State to still prove. Last year Ohio State taught us that they can ignore struggles in the regular season and kind of turn it on and go on a run, right? They could move on from that. They did that better than anyone last year, right? In terms of flushing that Michigan loss and making a run in the playoffs. So I want to be clear that, like, Saturday, whoever wins or loses doesn't mean that I'm ruling them out of the national championship conversation. But I think if an undefeated team beats the other undefeated team, that's the team that would be the clear number one going into the playoff for me.
How do we talk about Indiana in that regard, Gillis? We do the tiers pod every summer. Would a win fundamentally change who has to be at the top of that? Because they both would be tier one at this point, which I don't think either one of you had them in tier one when we did it this offseason. But a certain somebody did. I'm not going to say who, though.
We'll see we'll see.
We'll see what
We'll see how. Yeah, we'll see. Because we were kind of projecting for the next 5 years, right?
Yeah. But it's almost like a power ranking, though, in a way. Where it's I don't know. Will just change your opinion of Indiana in terms of who actually is the best team in the Big Ten, best program in the Big Ten.
Yeah, Stefan had a lot of what I was going to say as somebody texted or messaged in, Stefan, you're my GOAT. I'm not going to co-sign that, but I will co-sign. I will co-sign the fact.
Grace's burner.
I will co-sign the fact that of a lot of what he said. I think for this year, it definitely changes your opinion. I think, like Stefan said, Ohio State would definitely have something to prove going to the playoff. I still think they would probably be the betting favorite. Obviously it depends on how Saturday goes. But I think long term, you're putting those two programs kind of side by side because, or at least going into this, obviously, there is kind of the looming question of Oregon is also going to make the college football playoff. So we'll see how that plays out. Indiana beat Oregon this year. We'll see what the playoff brings, but this definitely would put me in more of a mindset and more of a mentality to think that Indiana's staying power is not just, hey, they're good, but there's not an asterisk. There's not a however or a but or a there's not that coming out of whatever you say about Indiana. It is, they are on par with Ohio State, because I don't think any of us are going to pick Ohio State to lose in a blowout. And that would be the only real thing to where you're whoa, maybe what Indiana's building here is different, that would make you say that they are so much better. But, I do think, I do think long-term an Indiana victory makes you look at them and go, Cignetti's got this thing humming long-term. And frankly, you could probably look at it and say, this isn't even fully operational Indiana Cignetti, right? This isn't even, they're landing high school 5-star recruits, Curt Cignetti, because that's what this win to me would mean for Indiana. Is it's a proof of concept win of just, hey, we weren't ready last year. We were this year. And now we're ready to go. And now we can crank this thing up to another gear.
I think there's an element too of we're on the side of covering Ohio State, right? when you're on the other side, beating Ohio State does wonders for a program. And I'm
Yeah.
not just talking about Indiana doing it for the first time since 1988 and kind of what it would mean for them, but like we talk about Oregon in a different way because yeah, they got their butt kicked against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, but guess what? They beat Ohio State last year, so we always have to do the well, but like or did Oregon in the Rose Bowl look any more competitive than Indiana when they came to Ohio Stadium? No, not at all. But Oregon beat them earlier in the year, so I think a win for Ohio State goes a long way for the program. I covered Mississippi State in the SEC, and I was like, man, they haven't beaten Alabama since like Saban got there. Do you know what it would mean for this program just to win against Alabama? What it would mean for this program to beat Georgia? Like for a team like Indiana, all the success that they've had, there is always that mountaintop. There is always that hurdle that awaits you when you get to the mountaintop, and that has been Ohio State for this program. So I think for Indiana, or not for Indiana, or frankly anyone, beating Ohio State makes a statement, and that tells you that to this point, Ohio State is the clear number one. But by beating them, there is some power in that.
And with Oregon's, it was like they beat them, but they also beat them at home, right? And the thing is, it didn't change anybody's concept of like, okay, if these teams met on a neutral field, who would win the game? That's why Ohio State was still a favorite when they met, going into the Rose Bowl. I think Indiana beating Oregon at Oregon and then beating Ohio State on a neutral field would be a tandem of things that, to your point, who knows what comes after that, right? Ohio State can't have like a statement win against Indiana. It can only like check off goal number 2 of all the things they want to do this year. Indiana beating Ohio State is like a statement win of a program that's like, okay, last year we got our butt whooped. We clearly didn't belong on the field. We learned from that. We made some tweaks. Some guys got better. And then we spent 12 weeks showing, hey, and proving to ourselves more than anything, we belong on the field with Ohio State. And then to get on a neutral site field with Ohio State in a game that obviously it doesn't change anything in terms of the college football playoff. Both of these teams are getting buys. But you're playing for a trophy still, and it's on a neutral site. For Indiana to walk out of Saturday as a winner, I don't know if I do not think it changes who is the best program in college football, but it does start a conversation of how close is Indiana to becoming the best program in the Big Ten. If Cignetti gets this win and the Oregon win, it seems like they've had a pretty decent second recruiting class there. Maybe they attack the portal the right way. And it's coming at a perfect time because a lot of these guys who will be responsible for what Kirk Cignetti's done the last 2 years are leaving. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference between, you had a good team versus a good program, is you're going to get into this world of, okay, you did it once. Can you do it again now that you have our attention?
Yeah. I think last year there was definitely this thought of Indiana of they walked out on the field against Ohio State and we're like, we don't think I'm speaking as John Public here. Oh, we don't think Indiana's that good, blah, 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 blah. They lose by 23 points and everybody goes, see, I told you. And then they go play Notre Dame and then they lose by 10 points, but the game was it was in hand. And so, see, I told you. I think a win for Indiana, like beating Oregon's one thing. Ohio State's a different monster. Like Ohio State is just that different beast. And, we talk about who has more to gain, who has more to lose. I know that's not part of what we're going to do today. It's like, man, Indiana winning this, like that really changes things, because if Indiana goes out and like if they lose 35-15, like or 38-15, like they did a year ago, there would be this, oh, well, Indiana gets on the field with this, blah, blah, blah. There would be this thought. And I think this would completely erase that. I think this would completely change that to say, you beat Oregon on the road at their place. For some reason, we had to look at Indiana struggling at Penn State, despite the fact that every other good program usually has a struggle game where they're like, how are they tied with that team in the second half? Somehow Indiana didn't get, Indiana got criticized for that more harshly than everybody else when they played Penn State. But then you beat Ohio State. That to me, like you said, Stephen, when you pair those things together, it is a different beast, because I still think while they deserve a lot of credit, I'm probably not going to do it, but I still think there's going to be a lot of thought out there if they get, kind of run off the field of, well, they're still not there yet. And frankly, they're not even close. Like, I think people would kind of disregard that Oregon win, but man, you beat Ohio State if you're Indiana, and this thing cranks up to a gear that I don't think many people thought was possible.
I think if they get blown out, it just puts them in Oregon looking at each other in the eye. Honestly, I don't think the reason why one of the things I did wasn't go with who has the most to gain, who has the most to lose. I don't think either of these teams has anything to lose, either tangibly or, for the sake of a hour-long podcast. I just don't think this is a win-win situation for both teams on Saturday, which is why, Stefan, you've written this week, an idea of like the most non-consequential number one, number two team game we've ever seen, because Indiana winning, okay, now let's have a conversation about where Indiana's headed in this thing. Indiana losing, okay, we already thought Ohio State was better. In fact, we've already thought Ohio State was significantly better than everybody else in this country. So Indiana losing the same way everybody else has lost this year doesn't change that. Especially, all it does is it puts Indiana with like the best of the rest, and that's like Oregon and Texas and Bama, and the list can keep going on and on. While an Ohio State win is just kind of like, I know it's crazy. I just put Indiana in the same.
How do you feel? The consolation was Indiana getting lumped in with Alabama, Texas, and Oregon.
Can we just, because let me finish this first. If Ohio State wins, it checks off a second goal. If it loses, it's going to be annoyed that it didn't check off a second goal, and it can't be in a conversation with some of the greatest teams of all time anymore because it's not undefeated, but they can still go win a national championship. Stefan, you get to be a person with a degree from Indiana for the next 120 seconds. How did that hit your ears? Me just like flippantly putting Indiana in the same tier as some of the best programs in college football historically. How'd that feel?
I was kind of offended. You put them in with teams like, Texas that can't develop a 5-star quarterback, and teams like Alabama that can't run the ball. I don't know. It's kind of like a shot at Kurt Cignetti. I'm not sure I can stand it. You're lumping them in with a team that they beat. Come on, man. You can't be doing that. I think what's fascinating about this Saturday too is what comes after is obviously very interesting, but a win for Indiana against Ohio State, even if it's followed by a loss in the college football playoff quarterfinals against, I'm trying to think of who they would face, like Oklahoma or Notre Dame, obviously a disappointment, but certainly a big step forward for the program in terms of winning the Big Ten, beating Ohio State, right? Like, you can mix the disappointment with, celebration of what the next step has been, and that's competing with an Ohio State for 60 minutes, which would be fascinating. It's funny listening to people in Indiana circles of just like, this is the biggest game in program history until literally the next one. Like, that's how it's like. Last year, the game against Ohio State was the biggest game in program history until they had to turn around and play Notre Dame in the playoff. And that was the biggest game in program history until they win and won at Oregon. And that was the biggest game in program history until Saturday. And then Saturday will be the biggest game in program history until, they're either playing in the Rose Bowl or they're playing, in the Cotton Bowl or something against Ole Miss. So that would be, it's fascinating. We've talked about this a lot kind of in the meetings that we have with our bosses and kind of, stories that we write and thinking of. And it's like, we keep looking into it, trying to find an example of why this isn't the greatest turnaround and the quickest turnaround in sports, period, right? Definitely college football. And it's hard to find an example. Like, I know a few years ago when the Premier League, like, I think it was like Leicester City or something like that, had just been, what's the opposite of relegated? Promoted, just been promoted. And then they won like the Premier League. And it was like, well, how the hell did this just happen? So that's maybe the closest example, but yeah, it's pretty crazy.
15 months ago, I tell you, Indiana's 3 wins away from a national championship, and you go, huh? Basketball team's doing pretty well, huh? Here we are.
Terrible loss yesterday. Move on. Anyways,
Indiana has the number 9 class in the Big Ten right now. I think a win against Ohio State is the difference between them having the number 9 class in the Big Ten next December and having the number 5 class in the Big Ten next December. I think it's that simple. Do you guys think this is sustainable?
I'll piggyback off what you said there, because I'm looking at, I have the recruiter rankings pulled up over here, and their 2026 class is 32nd nationally, but 7 of their 22 commits are 4 stars, right? And you look at that,
Yeah.
so they're 32nd overall, but like there's only like 23 teams that have 7 or more 4 stars committed.
Mhm.
Obviously, you at the top, and that's where the 5 stars kind of come into the mix. But like I look at these rankings, North Carolina's 17th in class rankings. They have 39 commits, and 13 of them are 4 stars, right? Indiana has
Yeah.
17 fewer commits and only 6 fewer 4 stars, right? So like I think the Indiana model of it felt like going into Cignetti year one, it was so much portal, especially guys coming
Mhm.
with him from James Madison. And you're looking at yourself being like, all right, it's fun for a year, but there's a reason Ohio State doesn't get 30 guys from the portal every year, right? There's a reason they are very selective with the portal. They seem to be doing something where it's a good mix of you're getting high school talent, not just for the sake of quantity, but you're looking at the quality as well, mixing it with what you get in the portal. It looks right now similar to kind of what we saw, I think, in the early years of Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, where the portal was an emphasis, but after the first couple of years, the portal was used not in the way of Ohio State, but kind of somewhere in the middle ground, right? Where it's not what Colorado is doing either. It's not what Ohio State's doing. It's somewhere in the middle where you're mixing good high school talent with good guys from the portal, and you're getting an influx of talent as opposed to 40 portal guys. So I feel this year, talking about it today compared to last year, that it's a lot more sustainable when you look at what they're doing in the recruiting ranks. So I look at some of the teams around them. Vanderbilt's one spot ahead of them. Ole Miss is one spot below them. Obviously, Ole Miss is affected by a coaching change, but like Missouri's consistently been a decent team in the SEC. They're a few spots below Indiana. Utah's a few spots ahead of Indiana. Iowa's a few spots of Indiana. So like I think right now it feels a bit more sustainable. And then you throw on top of that the resources that they have. I mean, Indiana's got money. They're not shy about it. It in the new era of college football, it seems fairly sustainable.
Yeah. I think it is more sustainable maybe than we all thought a year ago. I think we all kind of looked at it a year ago and went, "Oh, well, they did look, Cignetti's a great coach. What they did was really impressive. They have a lot of really good players. They're better than everybody thought. They're much better than everybody thought." But teams that portal this heavy typically can't sustain this. And like Stefan just said, like I think kind of bare minimum, like with how good of a coach we know Cignetti is, I think you're talking kind of sustainability for them at this point is like 8-4, like minimum. Like you pair kind of where they're at recruiting rankings wise with what Cignetti and his staff have been able to do and the acumen that we know he has. I think bare minimum, you're kind of talking every year, like flirting top 25, like bare minimum. Like, and like I said earlier, like with the basketball joke, it's like you tell Indiana fans from 4 years ago that they're going to be like a borderline top 25 team, they're taking it. And that it's remarkable how it's been able to change. I just think sustainability is so hard at the top and sustainability is so hard to keep that I think we almost need to see another year of this because I think something that I am curious about with Indiana is, they're going to play minimum 2 games against 2 of the best 10 or so teams in the country. And, you know, at some point, you're going to need your evaluations of those 3 and 4 star players to beat out, while less than there was 10 years ago, you're going to need to beat out 5 star players from a Georgia, right? Like you're going to need to beat out your 3 and 4 star guys that you're having in the portal. They had 7 4 stars this year. You're going to need those guys to play like 5 stars. You're going to need some of your evaluations to hit a little bit more. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I think they can sustain it. But I think there also needs to be more of an elevation. And I think that can start this Saturday, like with what we were talking about of, man, if you win that game or, even if you're close, I think you're able to kind of prove like we are right there. Let's bring this thing to the next step. Let's bring this thing to the next level. So yeah, sustainability is absolutely possible at Indiana. It is just very, very difficult to do. And I guess we'll kind of see what Indiana can do in terms of cranking this up to another gear. But they have given us no reason to doubt them at this point. We were at the Big Ten Media Day in 2024. Kurt Signetti was like, "So we got picked to finish second to last. Last time we did that, we won the conference." And he was talking about it, I think, at JMU or one of his previous stops. Everything he's done, he showed up and said, "We're going to win and we're going to be really good." And they've won and they've been really good. I have no reason to doubt that this can't be sustainable.
Another element to that too is what you say there. He always says "we" in the sense of his staff, and that's something that Ryan Day's talked a lot about. Is that they've kept the same core like throughout all these stops. And if Ryan Day talks a lot about how important stability is at Ohio State, and I know it's ironic we say that a day after Brian Hartline took a job at USF, but Brian Hartline also been there probably longer than a lot of people would have been, right? There's an element of stability that goes a long way for program as well. And you look at Bryant Haynes, he's been staying put as defensive coordinator, and Shanahan working as the offensive coordinator. That's a big piece of this too. Stephen, I want to ask you a question just because, and you could touch on the sustainability stuff, but I feel like you might agree. Is Signetti's Indiana like able to be replicated? Is there a word for that? Replicability or something like that?
Replicable. Yeah,
Can you repeat it?
Replicable. That's kind of a tongue twister. Replicable. As Stephen literally chokes.
I'm dying saying the word. Yeah. Maybe that's Ryan Day. The red dot. I'm just no, don't even say it. I think that possibility is right. I think enough has changed in college football to where I don't think this was the goal of some of these things, but it naturally created some parity. I don't think if Kirk Signetti had showed up in 2014, he would have been able to do this. But I think obviously he's won at a lot of the other places he's gone, as he says, Google him. But the fact that he was able to bring a lot of that foundation from James Madison with him, I mean, you're seeing Lane Kiffin try to do it with his move from LSU, Ole Miss to LSU, right? You see coordinators try to do it. Jim Knowles came to Columbus and he tried to bring a lot of his guys, his support staff with him, not the assistant coaches, but like the support staff, the GAs and the QCs with him. Matt Guerrieri literally followed Jim Knowles up here, which is why when Ryan Day was talking about the type of defensive coordinator he was looking for, he didn't need a dude who was going to bring a whole brigade with him. We already got a brigade here. You just bring yourself and we'll provide everything else. I think Vanderbilt's sort of doing it, right? Like, think about what if Jarrett Curtis was from Indiana? I was trying to think of a small town in Indiana and I was drawing a blank. So
Muncie.
What if he was from Indiana and he was committed to Notre Dame? And then 72 hours before signing day, Hayes Fawcett or Steve Wiltfong or any of these other recruiting guys is like breaking. Jarrett Curtis, Bloomington native, has flipped to Indiana. We'd all be like, holy moly, this just got serious. Well, that's what Vanderbilt just did. They're just not the number 2 team in the country. But Vanderbilt flirted with the playoff this year, and they had a kid in their backyard who's the best quarterback in the country who was headed to Georgia because, of course, he was headed to Georgia. And then what was it, like a month ago, Gillis, where he popped up at Vandy when game day was there and was like walking around the campus and whatnot. And here it is a month later. Now he's flipped to Vanderbilt, and it's fundamentally changed, I think, the long-term expectations for Vanderbilt. That doesn't mean that Vanderbilt's going to turn into a top 5 program, but I looked at Jarrett Curtis flipping to Vanderbilt the same way you probably looked at Nebraska flipping Dylan Raiola from Ohio State / Georgia. It's like, okay, well, you got a foundational piece there to work off of. The problem with Nebraska is they didn't have everything else in place. So when Dylan gets there, it's like, hey, Dylan, you got to start from day one from us. And I just kind of like pull it all together. And I think that's what's going to end up happening with Jarrett Curtis at Vanderbilt. I assume he'll probably be their starter next year if Diego Pavia is out of eligibility. And they'll probably have a similar season to what Nebraska had. And if I'm wrong, well, then Vanderbilt people come clip it. All right. But he's saying Vanderbilt's not going to be good next year is like some hot take. But I think Signetti has built the foundation. So what if he would have flipped a 5-star quarterback? Or not even a 5-star. What if Luke Fahey and what it sounds like came down to Indiana and Ohio State had just chosen Indiana? Would we be going, okay, Indiana's got a future? They got a future quarterback. They got a guy to where they now don't have to keep going to find a guy in the portal. And there's nothing wrong with the portal, but every program in the country, every coach in the country, not named Lane Kiffin, actually wants to build through the high school recruiting because that's what sustainable looks like. And if they had Luke Fahey, who I think we'd be like, okay, they'll probably portal one more year. So Fahey's not a starter as a true freshman, but Cignetti is going to be doing everything possible to get Luke Fahey to be their starting quarterback in 2027. I think we'd be viewing them differently. So I do think it's replicable. Is it going to be easy? No, you got to find a coach who is willing to do what Kirk Cignetti did, and that's kind of be a troll. Enough of a troll to like get everybody's attention. It was what he did last year was very, hey, everybody look at me. And then he backed it up on the field. But then he built on it, which is why when we were talking to him on Sunday, Stefan, did that sound like the same guy who was talking about, we're going to beat Michigan, we're going to beat Ohio State, we're going to do this, Google me? Was that the same guy? No, because now he's built something and he can go from there. But you got to find a coach who can galvanize everybody around you in a way that makes – because Indiana is not the only school that's got donors and that's got alum with money, but someone's got to give them a reason to give the money. And I think that's what Kirk Cignetti did. And so that's why I think it's sustainable, because there are people with money who are like, we're going to make sure this is sustainable because we believe in that guy. Let's talk ball.
Let's do it.
Indiana will win if, Andrew Gillis.
Indiana will win if you got to put a lid on the big plays for Ohio State. You got to keep everything in front of you. You cannot let them throw deep to Carnell Tate and throw deep and kind of make just plays that fundamentally change a game. Because imagine this scenario, and happened last year. It's possible Indiana gets the ball first. They go on a 6-minute touchdown drive, and the 70%, 60%, whatever it is, fans at Lucas Oil for Indiana are losing their minds. They're going nuts. They're screaming. They're yelling. They're thinking about the Rose Bowl. They're going, oh my God, we get to go to California in late winter in Indiana. This is great. Or early winter. This is great. And then on the second play of the game, Carnell Tate goes 65 yards for a touchdown. And all of a sudden, you're back to square one, and you just went 75 yards against the best defense in the country, and now you got to do it again. That is a problem for Ohio State. That is a problem for Indiana, excuse me. I'm looking at Julian Sands' PFF numbers right now. He's ridiculous. Down the field, he's 16 of 19 between the numbers for 635 yards, 8 touchdowns, and a 158.3 passer rating. That's using the NFL passer rating. That's perfect. That is literally a perfect passer rating. That's a deep throw. That's more than 20 yards. Outside down the left hash, 4 of 8, 206, 2 touchdowns. Outside on the right hash, 5 of 12, 133. That's really, really good. And the thing that Julian Sand does well is he's very accurate, and all those things are true. And yes, he's throwing to superheroes on the outside, but that's how the game fundamentally changes. And that is, I think, the dynamic that Ohio State presents that we have not seen and we might not ever see, but this is the team maybe that can do it, where Indiana shows up fired up. They're ready. They're firing on all cylinders. Cignetti and Shanahan have that team rolling, and Mendoza's locked in, and Surratt's making great catches on the sideline. Everything looked great. And then OSU gets the ball and they score first because they hit a big play. Or Indiana's controlling the game and they hit a big play. And it's like, ugh, Hoosiers, what? Oh my goodness, you just dominated them for 8 minutes and now it's tied. Or maybe it's, not even the other way. It's, hey, we punted and now Ohio State gets a bomb off and it's a touchdown. And it's like, whoa, this is different. We're in trouble. Any situation that Ohio State puts themselves in negatively, they can get out of it because of what they can do down the field with Carnell, with JJ. So that to me is what Indiana needs to do to win the game. You cannot get beat deep, because if you do, frankly, I don't think it matters how well you play. If you get beat deep 2 or 3 times, Ohio State's going to win the game.
So before I have you go, Stefan, does yours have anything to do with red zone play?
It does not.
Okay, cool. Indiana will win if
Fernando Mendoza plays a clean game, right? And I think it probably extends to a lot of the rest of the team. But I'll start with Fernando first. Julian Sains had 5 turnover-worthy plays all season. Obviously, the one at Michigan probably stands out and how recent it was. 5 turnover-worthy plays all season. Fernando had 3 against Purdue, and then 2 weeks before that had 2 against Penn State. So he's had 5 over the 2 of the last 3 games for Indiana. And then obviously he had the interception against Iowa, a pick 6 against Oregon. He has been outstanding this year, and the way he's responded to his mistakes has been better than anyone in college football. But the mistakes have been there, and Ohio State's a team where you cannot make a lot of mistakes against them. You just can't. You can't give everything Andrew just said about the offense is very true, and they're explosive. You can't give them favorable field position after wasted possessions. It just Fernando has to be very smart and very smart. I think sometimes this gets confused with conservative. But if you are taking shots, you got to be very selective with your shots and understanding of where you're placing the ball and not putting it in danger, right? And that part of that is his offensive line, and there's a lot that goes into it. And then it extends outside of Fernando as well, because there's no part of me that's rewatched last year's Indiana-Ohio State game and thought Indiana was the better team and should have won that game. Ohio State was dominant, and the defensive line especially, and just getting in Curtis Rourke's face and making life miserable for him. And then, it starts raining and it's cold. It wasn't, if you're Curtis Rourke, it just was not a fun day. It could not have been a fun day. But it's also hard to ignore that game and not think about the sequence where it's Indiana, as Andrew mentioned, they take the early lead. Ohio State finally gets going a little bit on offense. They tie it. Indiana fumbles. Will Howard throws an interception. So we're still at 7-7. Indiana, they survive that mistake. And then right before the end of the half, Indiana's punter fumbles the snap. Ohio State gets it right on the doorstep, and they take a 14-7 lead. We go to halftime. We come back. Indiana's punter punts it left, where everyone is instructed to go punt cover right. And Caleb Downs returns it for a touchdown. And in the blink of an eye, it's 21-7. Ohio State still would have won that game, but Indiana got punched in the mouth very quickly. And both of it was directly the result of just blatant mistakes, right? So Indiana needs to play clean. Joel in the comments saying, no kidding. Like, yeah, it's very obvious. Like, it's very simple. But this has been an area where Mendoza showed us, at least in November, that he is a little bit turnover prone. And if Indiana has any chance of winning, he just can't do that, right? If he plays routinely, the way the Ohio State talks about it, like there's teams where you get on the field with Ohio State before, it's like, it's not as simple as making the routine plays routinely. Like, you got to make some plays. Like, your quarterback's got to be better than he's ever been in order to beat Ohio State. I don't think that's the case for Mendoza. If he's just not as sloppy as he's been in some of the other games, the routine plays routinely can help Indiana win this game. I think they're good enough to where they don't have to do something out of like the realm of possibility to win this game. They gotta make some plays. But they can't afford to make mistakes. Otherwise, they're just going to have no chance. And it's going to look like what happened last year.
Does anybody have a red zone point?
Not in this segment.
But you do have one?
A little bit later in the most to gain.
Oh, in the most to gain.
But it's more about Indiana's red zone than Ohio State's red zone.
I have like multiple. I'm nuts. You've worked with me for a year and a half. You know this about me at this point. And I have 30 million things going on, which is why when Ryan Day was like, I don't know, man, I just thought about what if things go down? I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Because I would be thinking about that type of crazy thing at that time last week. Okay, so I'll save my red zone one for Ohio State. Indiana wins if it can find the escape hatch in Ohio State's defense. There's no perfect defense. There's no perfect offense. Everything has a mulligan. Every Death Star has a small little thing where if you hit that thing, it blows up the entire Death Star. It's a Star Wars point. I love Star Wars. And I've watched a couple of Ohio State games this year, and some of the better commentators, Jake Butt, I don't have to say some, Jake Butt, the CBS guys do a great job too, but Jake Butt is really good at this. A lot of them have pointed out at times this year that because of what Ohio State's defense is, sometimes the seams are open. And if you have a quarterback who can hit it, but more importantly, if you have a receiving threat who can like do something with it, whether it's Omar Cooper, whether it's Elijah Sharop, whether they put a tight end in that situation, if you can hit that, you can move the ball. Even Bryce Underwood hit it once. He just wasn't consistent with it. Rutgers hit it a few times, wasn't consistent with it. Arch Manning hit it a couple times, wasn't consistent with it. I think even Luke Altmaier hit it a couple times, but he wasn't consistent with it. But he at least had Hank Beatty to throw it to, and Damon Williams had Denzel Boston to throw it to. They hit it a couple times, but they weren't consistent. Look, Fernando Mendoza and these two receivers are the first team Ohio State's going to play who can be consistent with it. And so it's not a numbers thing. It's just the small little area of the field where you can move the ball there. There might be some money to be gained in that small little area of the field for Indiana. So if they can hit, and we're talking about a team who also likes to run four verts a lot. Last year, we called it a lot. They like to throw back shoulder throws a lot. And we were like, hey, man, if the corners get handsy, they might just be able to move the ball up the field. Right. But I think this year they don't have to spam let's just throw a back shoulder fade so we can try to get somebody on a penalty. I think they can just throw the ball, run what they run. And if they hit it enough times, all of a sudden, 15-yard chunk there, 12-yard chunk here, 21 chunk yard here, all of a sudden you're blinked and you're like, man, Indiana's figured out Matt Patricia's defense. Yes and no. They found the escape hatch, which, again, exists in every defense. Every defense is designed to significantly take away one thing, but it also has to give up another thing, right? Whether it's you're an aggressive, you blitz a lot, so you leave your corners on island. So, okay, if your corner gets beat, it's an explosive play. Or if your bend don't break, it can be hard to get off the field sometimes. Or it's you play a cover 3 base, which is what this defense is. Seams just might be open against cover 3. So that's my major thing of if Indiana wins it because it was able to consistently attack the one part of this defense that just might be there for the taking because they have a quarterback and a wide receiver who can do so. Ohio State will win if Stefan.
Ohio State will win if it can get pressure with 4. And I know there's people who are listening saying that Jim Knowles just log on and say that. But I think the RPO that Indiana runs with their offense, it's going to be very important for Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese to be able to kind of read the eyes of Fernando Mendoza and understand, what's going to happen on any given play. I'm not saying that they're going to be, on their heels caught a bit. But I just think I don't know how much Matt Patricia will maybe unleash them in the blitz game, compared to how he's done, in previous games. And I'll touch on that a bit in a second. But I just think that Kenyatta and Caden Curry, Caden McDonald, and Edric Houston / Tywan Malone, they're just going to have to create some pressure on their own to really put this Indiana offense in an uncomfortable place. I think if Ohio State has to blitz more, because they haven't really blitzed a ton, even though you see Arvell Reese come after the quarterback a good amount, they don't blitz a ton necessarily. And that's where if that has to change, things start to look a little bit more different, and you're forcing, Matt Patricia to maybe call things differently than he would. So getting pressure with 4 is important. And an important caveat to that is Arvell Reese can be part of that 4, right? We've seen where, a defensive tackle comes off the field and Arvell moves up, right? So, I think you can still unleash Arvell. I just think you can do it in a way where you still rush 4. So I think it's going to be important for Ohio State's defense to do that just because, and also you have Caleb Downs. So putting Arvell Reese at defensive end as part of a 4-man rush is fine because you still kind of have 2 linebackers back there with Caleb Downs being able to come into the box and things of that nature. So I think Ohio State should be fine. But the moment you start having to bring I just forgot English there. Start having to bring more than 4 guys on the pressure. I think it changes up, the equation a bit for you defensively, and it maybe opens some things up for Indiana in the passing attack, right? Attacking where that guy's blitzing from is something that Fernando Mendoza is pretty decent at. So you got to keep an eye on that. So early in the game, I think we're going to see, Kenyatta and Caden Curry have some opportunities to break some things and make Fernando Mendoza uncomfortable. Otherwise, Matt Patricia is going to have to adjust, and it becomes a bit more difficult, right? I'm not saying that Ohio State can't win if it blitzes, right? Oh my God, they just blitzed, 4 guys going after the passer. They're going to lose this game. That's not necessarily the case, but it makes it a little different, right? The equation gets thrown off. The numbers that you have kind of in the secondary get thrown off, and this is a really good passing attack that can make you take advantage of that.
I think I wrote this in my notes. I think Indiana, especially up front, there's a lot in common with what Ohio State does up front, where neither team sends more than 4 a lot. But they don't all. It's just not as simple. What did Saban call it? The antiquated rush. It's not just as simple as, hey, 4 defensive linemen go win your 1-on-1s. They'll send blitzes, but they're like simulated pressure. Where, and I was watching the Oregon game, and the broadcasters even brought it up. They'll always send 4. You just don't always know where the 4 are coming from. So on this play, it might be Aiden Fisher coming on a blitz, and all of a sudden, Mikel Camaro is dropping back in coverage. Okay, you still sent 4. It's just one of your 4 was a linebacker. Or you might send a cornerback blitz, but then also a defensive tackle for whatever reason that's jumping back in coverage. Okay, you sent 4. It's just one was a cornerback. So there's an element to, I think, Julian Sand's mind, which Ryan Day has complimented a lot the last couple of weeks. That has to be on point. His ability to recognize where things are coming from and pre-snap, communicating that. And then I think Tegra Shabola and Phillip Daniels have to have another really strong day along with that left side of the offensive line, because it's not blitzing, but simulated pressures can sometimes be worse than blitzes, because that's when young quarterback can kind of get scrambled a little bit.
Yeah, Caden Curry, like, for example, 12 times in the last 2 games, so against Rutgers and Michigan, he dropped in coverage, right? And he's done it 37 times total this season. So we're talking like a third of the time he's done it has happened the last 2 weeks. So yeah, like you said, it might be a linebacker blitzing, right? It might be Arvell Reese coming in and rushing the passer, but Caden Curry is the one dropping back in coverage, right? So it's going to be difficult for Fernando Mendoza to kind of dissect all that. But at the end of the day, if they can't win with 4, Ohio State's defense can't win with 4, that's where it becomes a bit more difficult for Matt Patricia and that crew.
Gillis, Ohio State will win if.
Yeah, kind of an adjacent category. I have if Davison Igbinosun, Jermaine Matthews, and Lorenzo Styles play well. The RPO offense is such a just timing-based attack, right? It is very quick. It is very, regimented on, different coverages and things like that. But like finding seams and putting guys in conflict, as Ryan Day said this week. If you do that, if you're Indiana, then you're going to have some success. But it also is going to come down to one-on-one matchups. And if Davison, Jermaine, and Lorenzo kind of play well in the secondary, and whether that's knocking guys off their routes, whether that's, being aggressive and making Fernando double pump in the pocket, like that's where I think Indiana gets into trouble. And I think that's where Ohio State can really kind of put the clamps down on. I think we can see the thing that we all kind of laugh at, where you go back and you grab the seatbelt and you pull it from a mile back, that we always laugh at, that for some reason defensive backs decide to do when the ball goes 15 yards over their head. They're like, nope, not even close. I don't know why they do that, but they do. You're going to see a lot of that, and you're going to see a lot of that if Ohio State wins the game. If those 3 play well, because like Indiana's got some good receivers, right? Like Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper, like those 2 paired with Fernando Mendoza is probably the best trio in terms of passing the football that Ohio State has seen this year. Especially with, like, you go back, I mean, it's like, what's the other comparison? Like Arch Manning. Like there really hasn't been like a, whoa, like this team can really air the football out. Like maybe Washington, Washington could be in that mix as well, but I think Indiana is just the best. So if Ohio State's corners play well, they will win the game, because the rush is true. And I'm going to touch on that here in a segment or two, but like the rush is important, but that can really throw off everything Indiana wants to do offensively. And if those 3, and maybe specifically Igbinosun and Matthews. If they play well, it's over. And yes, I'm glad somebody said that they do the celebration because it's sick. Yeah, it's just funny that like the quarterback's throwing it away, or the quarterback overthrows a receiver that maybe even is like open by a yard or two, and the DB still does that. I still laugh at it. So
CK 1998 went to Ohio State to teach that Eurostep move that Myles Garrett did. I don't know if anybody else can do that the way Myles Garrett's doing it, man. That's a
that's like telling somebody to like shoot a Steph Curry 3. It's like
that's a one-on-one move. Yes, I'm glad you included Lorenzo Styles in that conversation as well, because Amari Cooper, 58 catches, 804 yards, 11 touchdowns. Elijah Surratt, 48 catches, 650 yards, 11 touchdowns. They're tied with Jeremiah Smith for the most in the Big Ten. Of course, Elijah Surratt missed 2 games, including that Penn State game where Indiana had that game-winning drive at the end where Amari Cooper made what I think might be the best catch of the year. It's either that or that kid from Miami who had the catch earlier in the year. But the reason I'm glad you included Lorenzo Styles into that mix is because the more Cooper Jr. spends most of his time in the slot, 83.
Can we save that? Can we save that for most to gain?
Oh, gotcha. Oh, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, that's what Stefan just did.
Yeah, seatbelt. Seatbelt on, Steven.
I know what everybody's are, and I knew what Gillis's was, and so now this is going to be a really fun most to gain. Ohio State wins if they finish drives in the red zone. You want to know who the best team in the country is at red zone defense? It's the team they're playing on Saturday. Indiana has only allowed 27.78% of their red zone trips to end in touchdowns. And I think that is the only potential Achilles heel for Ohio State's offense, is that sometimes they can get to the red zone and get stalled. That's what happened in the first 3 games, really the first 3 or 4 games. And it's why Ryan Day was saying ahead of the Minnesota game, the goal was 75%. And I wrote the story about it at cleveland.com OSU about a month ago about, like, is that even a feasible thing to do? And I researched it, and it's not easy. There's not a lot of teams over the past decade who have been over 75% touchdown conversions in the red zone. That's a pretty difficult thing to do. But the red zone issues, I don't think they're as big of have been as big of a deal since November. Partially because against Penn State, they were just throwing 40 yards down the field every single time, but also they were playing bad defenses. But then it popped up again on that first drive against Michigan, the first full drive, right? They only played 2 plays on the first drive. On that drive where they got stalled at like the 1 yard line because they tried running it with CJ Donaldson. They tried sneaking it with Julian Sand. They tried goal line fading it to Jeremiah Smith. And then just when they thought they had Michigan all ready to oversell on the run, and Stefan, I know Ryan Day talked about that on the radio show, they were ready. They called a play action pass, and you were going to have Jelani Thurman low, and you were going to have Bennett Christian high. And it was essentially a high-low look, a levels look, and it worked. Jelani Thurman is open in the back of the end zone. False start Bennett Christian. So now you've got to settle for a field goal. So instead of it being a 7-6 game, it's a 6-3 game. And we all know how the rest of the game played out, so it didn't end up mattering. But I think those types of plays are going to matter on Saturday. If you get to the red zone, you have to score. Ohio State is 30th in the country in red zone conversion rate, and they are 6th in the Big Ten at scoring touchdowns in the red zone. It's 69.35. They're right behind Oregon, who's 5th in that category. And it's the red zone touchdowns for Ohio State has become this thing that isn't a thing until it's a thing. And what you don't want to do is be looking back Saturday night and we're going, how did Ohio State lose this game when they dominated it for 60 minutes? Well, they didn't finish drives in the red zone. The Fiesta Bowl in 2019, yeah, we can chalk it up to Shaun Wade ejection and a forced fumble, scoop and score that ended up being a incompletion. Those plays mattered. I'm not taking away from those plays. But Clemson was in position to turn those moments into a win because early in the game, they didn't finish off drives in the red zone with touchdowns. And you can't have that. You can't have the drives not finishing in the red zone. You got to finish off drives in the red zones. If they do that, I don't know how Indiana stops this offense. Because if Ohio State is able to be explosive, but then also finish off drives in the red zone with touchdowns, I think this thing can get out of hand very, very quickly. Gillis, Indiana loses if.
Yeah, Indiana loses if we see a repeat of what happened on their offensive line from a year ago. Stefan was kind of talking about those big moments and those big plays, and that's true, right? Like those things definitely were there. However, that Indiana offensive line just collapsed, right? And there was I think Signetti talked about the silent count being an issue. They had a couple false starts, if memory serves, in that game. It just didn't go great. It did not go well for them. The offensive line was not good. Ohio State had 5 sacks. Cody Simon had 2.5. Like, they dominated. Curtis Rourke was under siege the entire game. If that happens again, like Stefan was talking about, getting home with 4 for Ohio State, get home with 4, 5, or 6. If Fernando Mendoza is going down 5 times again, I feel really good about Ohio State winning the football game. Now, Indiana has definitely gotten better on their offensive line. Carter Smith, he's their best pass blocker per PFF at tackle. Really, really good. Pat Coogan, I've talked about him this week, is like a really, really important add for them in the middle at center. Drew Evans, another at guard, another really good pass blocker. They've gotten better, and their offensive line has definitely improved from a year ago. And I think that was maybe one of the areas that they were deficient at in 2024. So it's important to see an improvement. And I think Indiana has definitely gotten better, but if that line doesn't hold up, like if it goes up against an Ohio State front that, on a 3rd and 8 could be rushing first round pick Caden McDonald at nose, maybe not first round pick, but mid 2nd, 3rd round pick Caden Curry at a tackle, and then Arvell Reese on one side, and then day 2 pick Kenyatta Jackson on the other. If they don't hold up against that, it doesn't matter. Davis Igbenogson and Jermaine Matthews could be fine, not good, but fine. And Indiana is going to be in some trouble because Fernando Mendoza is going to be under siege. So Indiana's line's got to hold up. If it doesn't, they're cooked.
Hoosiers lose if, Stefan.
They can't create turnovers. That's a big thing for this defense. They have the best turnover margin in the country. It's something that Ryan Day talked about on his radio show as well. And, there is an element to turnovers that's talked about as like turnover luck, right? Like sometimes, the fumble bounces your way. It's like, well, this team's fumbled it 700 times, but they've also recovered their own fumble 700 times. So it's you don't have fumble issues because you haven't lost one yet, right? So there is an element of luck with turnovers. But I think this Indiana defense just generally does a good job of generating turnovers, right? Making quarterbacks, see one thing and bring in another. It's what you were talking about there, Steven, where it's always a 4-man rush. You just don't know exactly who the 4 guys are going to be. That can make life difficult for Julian Sand. Ryan Day has talked about ball security with these running backs. We saw C.J. Donaldson have one late against Penn State. We saw Bo Jackson have one at the goal line against Rutgers? Is that what game it was?
Yeah.
So like that is an area where maybe Indiana can exploit things more so than some other teams in the country. And I think they have to, because if they're going to lose if they can't create, a turnover or 2, because Indiana's defense is, primarily zone, right? They'll sit back, and there's going to be opportunities for Julian Sand to kind of dink and dunk his way down the field. I predicted in our outrageous predictions that Brandon Ennis was going to have a career high receptions, because I think they're just going to be guys, open, 5 to 7 yards down the middle of the field. And that's fine, but you got to be able to break a play at some point, right? You got to either be able to get some pressure, force a sack or something like that, or force a turnover, right? So if Indiana doesn't generate any turnovers, I think they're going to lose. So this is probably the right way to defend against Ohio State, right? Like, we can't in January have this conversation about Notre Dame where we're saying they run too much man, they're toast against Ohio State, And then there's a team that plays a ton of zone. And you're like, well, Ohio State's just going to dink and dunk their way down on the field. You can't stop them if you do that, right? You need to have some kind of a mix, right? It can't be that both ways are wrong. Indiana does have a decent enough mix. They will throw some man at Indiana, but most of it's going to be zone. And I think Ohio State's going to have opportunities to kind of meticulously go down the field. But Indiana's got to be opportunistic then and take those turnovers there and maybe jump a passing lane or just make a play, man. Like D'Angelo Ponce, go up and make a play. If they can't do that, if they can't, force a turnover or two, I think Indiana loses this game. So shocker for my Indiana wins and for my Indiana lose. I went turnover margin, right? Don't turn it over, create turnovers. It's a very obvious thing, but it feels like this Indiana team specifically is probably going to rely on that a bit more going up against a team like Ohio State.
I don't think Indiana has to play perfect to win. I think they have to flirt with playing perfect to win, which plays into Stefan creating turnovers, but they also have to take advantage of every single thing they do. Yeah. Right? If they get Ohio State in a 3rd and 11, they have to get off the field. If they get a random pass interference penalty and it sets them up at the 23-yard line, they have to go score a touchdown. If Julian Sand has another pick like he had against Michigan, that can't turn into 3 points. It has to turn into 7 points. It has to. I walked away from, I watched the Illinois game. I watched Iowa. I watched Oregon. I watched a little bit of Purdue because I liked watching Ryan Brown run around like a maniac in that game. And I rewatched last year's Ohio State or Indiana game, and I rewatched the Notre Dame Indiana game as well. And they are a very, very well coached team. That was my first takeaway, especially the Oregon game. I thought Dan Lanning and his staff got outcoached, like thoroughly outcoached against Krajisnik. And I thought coach, scheme, personnel, right? That's what Ryan Day always says decides the game. And if something's wrong, like coach, it's one of those 3 buckets. I thought Indiana's coaching bucket was so far and away better than any of Oregon's other 3 buckets when Indiana played Oregon in that game. And quite frankly, they only won by 10 because Fernando Mendoza threw a bad pick at the end of the game, which ended up not mattering and whatnot. I don't think Kirk Cignetti is going to outcoach Ryan Day, even if I know Brian Hartline's pulling double duty right now, but I think they're going to be pretty locked in because he's got motivation, right? If he locks in, they win this game. They're 13-0. They got 30 days, which means he can spend at least 2 of those weeks, I don't know, trying to build his own program down there and not worrying about what's going on up here, right? So you could probably use that. But that's what I didn't have a big analysis point here. Khalil Benson, he's going to play right. Like he's 100%. He's been back for a while. Their right tackle. So. Okay. Because if Zim Maholski is on the field, then Caden Curry is going to have a field day on the right side of Indiana's offense. And that's with all due respect to Zim Maholski. I saw what that looked like at Ohio State. There's a reason why he's not at Ohio State anymore. And I don't mean that facetiously. I'm being respectful with that. But I just think they have to play perfect because if they don't, I am wondering. I looked at how many top 50 offenses both of these defenses faced this year. Ohio State faced 3. Ohio's 34th. Washington's 23rd. And Michigan is 29th. They also played 4 other teams who are at least flirting with top 50. Texas is 51st, Illinois is 53rd, and then Penn State was 58th. Rutgers is 66th. Indiana's also played 3. They've actually played the highest of the bunch. Old Dominion was 13th. Kennesaw State was 43rd, so that's 2 non-P4 teams. Oregon was 9th, so I think that's the one that probably everybody's like, okay, that's the one that probably matters here, Stephen. And they played 2 others who were flirting with it, and that's Illinois and Penn State. So those are like-minded opponents for Indiana. Indiana, their numbers, and I'm not going to run down every number here because our producer Brendan told you that bores people, especially when they can't see the numbers. But they're beating teams like 45-6 every single week, like 45-10 every single week. They are beating teams the way we think Ohio State could beat teams if they decided to do that. And even Kirk Cignetti said you watch them sometimes on film and it feels like they're holding back. I didn't watch Indiana in any of those games and go, I think they're holding something back. I just think this is what they are. While Ohio State if they choose to go to that gear, even another coach just told us that he thinks this team has another gear that they're choosing not to do, which tells me if Indiana doesn't play perfect on Saturday, they're going to lose. And maybe I just spent way too much time coming to that conclusion, but I watched a lot of ball, so it was fun. Stefan, Ohio State will lose if.
I don't think Ohio State can afford to have many special teams miscues. And it's ironic because last year that's something that hurt Indiana a ton. But if this is going to be a close game, if it's going to be a number 1 versus number 2 type of game, and everything that we just talked about comes to fruition, where Indiana plays, close to a perfect game, or Indiana can get, some pressure on Julian Sayin, or whatever it looks like, right? Or Indiana can create turnovers. Special teams has proved to us last year that it's a pretty important phase in this matchup, right? And it kind of feels like this year, Ohio State's the team that's had some more special teams issues coming into this game, right? Like Indiana has the Big Ten kicker of the year, right? And whereas Ohio State, we have some, questions about Jaden Fielding still. Obviously, he had a big field goal against Michigan. This game is indoors, so you're not dealing with so much with the elements. And he was pretty good in the playoff last year, right? When he wasn't dealing with elements. But if red zone issues are a struggle for Ohio State, better not end up with 0 points. You better get at least 3 out of it, right? Like, and then, we want to talk about punt return, and it hasn't been an issue really since the Washington game, but nothing goes away, right? In terms of an issue, right? Like we say it hasn't been a problem since the Washington game. Okay. Until it is again, until something happens again. And then you say, well, they've been showing us since early in the season that this is going to be a problem. So I think special teams is pretty important in this. So Ohio State will lose if its special teams doesn't play well. If, that could be a turnover, that could be a missed field goal. I think both those things go a long way if this game is indeed, the spread's 4, right? So people expect this game to be close. If that's the case, no special teams miscues.
Gillis.
Yeah, Ohio State will lose if Indiana wins the turnover margin as they have done all year. I have some stats for you guys. In terms of total gained interceptions this year, total gained turnovers, Indiana is tied for 24th. That is tied for 7th with 24. The ability to not speak took me this time. So Indiana is one of the best teams in college football at taking the football away. Turnovers lost, which, by the way, UConn had 2 all year. Very impressive. Good job, Huskies. Indiana, 3rd in the country with 7. That means that Indiana takes away the ball like one of the best teams in the country. They are one of the best teams at doing it. And they are one of the best teams at not giving up the football. Their turnover margin is the best in college football. They have a plus 17 turnover margin in the sport. Their turnover margin per game is 1.42. That is something that's very interesting to me because we talk about Ohio State playing slow. We talk about Ohio State having all of this, they're controlling the clock and blah, blah, blah. Ohio State had 8 possessions against Michigan, and they scored 27 points. I'm not going to count. They technically had 9, but I'm also not going to count the 4-play end of game drive. So 8 drives that mattered. One of them ended with a pick. And listen to this: interception, touchdown, punt, touchdown, field goal, punt. So 1, 2, 3, 4 drives you score on. A turnover changes the complexity of this game because we've talked about this kind of in a joking manner of Ohio State's only beaten UCLA 10-0. Everybody around the country is going to go, what's going on here? And then they have to look at it and go, oh, well, Ohio State had the ball twice and they scored a touchdown and kicked a field goal. I think this was what happened at Penn State where was it like 17-14, whatever the score, I forget what it was at this point. But it was kind of like everybody's like, Penn State's kind of hanging with them. And we were like, Ohio State has driven the ball right down the field. And then they fumbled. But that was the reason why the game was close at halftime. Because they fumbled. And Indiana gets a pick, a fumble. They stop Ohio State on 4th down. They block a punt. whatever the case is, if Indiana wins that turnover margin, again, as they have done all year, they are quite literally the best team in college football at making sure that they will take the football away from you and they will not give you the football back. If Ohio State falls victim to that, man, 2 interceptions, 2 fumbles, 2 I don't know, somebody slips and falls and the ball hits his arm on a punt and Indiana recovers it. All that takes is, and now even if you think Ohio State's going to kill Indiana, this game gets close. And if you think this game is going to be close, that will swing the favor in favor of the Hoosiers. So if Indiana wins the turnover battle, Ohio State's going to lose.
Gillis going with turnover battle and special teams miscues. I wonder where you got that from.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Ryan.
Hey, man, we strive for excellence over here.
Mine is very simple. Indiana runs a heavy RPO scheme, and a lot of the R in that are like outside zones. And I think the one thing, and I've said it to Stefan like 4 weeks in a row, why can't this team stop the run on the perimeter? That's it. Just at the edge. Can't get out. Don't like. I think it's just at the edge in the run game. I think up the middle, ironically enough, has become so stout. And it's because Caden McDonald, the defensive lineman of the year in the Big Ten, has just been so awesome in there. I think on the edges, if Indiana can get out on the edge, and they've got 3 guys that they run the ball with. They got Roman Hemby, Kalen Black, and Kobe Martin. Roman Hemby's got 163 carries, Black's got 126, and Martin's got 70. So they just like Ohio State, it is kind of a running back by committee situation with Hemby being the best of the bunch. If they can get out on the edge and maybe have some explosives there, I think that's how Ohio State loses this game if they can't stop the runs on the perimeter. Because if you remember, even Michigan, before Jordan Marshall got down with a hurt, he was getting with a shoulder injury. He was getting out to the edge a little bit and making some runs happen. The first play of the game was a 36-yard run, and that was on the edge. So set the edge, or you might lose this football game. Most to gain. Indiana. Well, I guess we're going to start with Indy. Are we starting with Ohio State first, or are we starting with Indiana? Because it looks like we're starting with Ohio State. Okay, let's start with Indiana. Andrew, which Indiana player has the most to gain?
Yeah, I went with Mikael Kamara.
Okay.
This is somebody where I was kind of surprised that you look at his stats. Do you? I don't know if you guys know this offhand. Do you know how many sacks he has this year?
Like 4.
He has 1.
Yeah,
he has
you're right.
1 sack, and his pressure rates, like if you look at PFF and stuff like that, his pressure rates are good, and he's also been hurt. But Mikael Kamara is a good pass rusher who's going up against, a really, really good player in Austin Sierreveld, and I think improving, maybe the word, like I don't know what you want to call it with Daniels, but like I think Daniels is a sturdy right tackle. This is a big game for Kamara because I think, the turnover battle that I was talking about that Indiana, I think, has to win. How do you do that? You get a hand in Julian Sayen's face. This is important, but I think Kamara's got a lot to prove here. Like he's from Northern Virginia. He was the prototypical JMU guy where he's a great player from a great program in Northern Virginia. Shout out Stonebridge in Loudoun County. That's where I'm from. He was just a dominant player for a program that like wins or competes for state championships every year. But he's also 6'1". If he was 6'3" or 6'4", he's probably playing at like Penn State right now. But he's not. He's 6'1". So he went to JMU, went to play for the Dukes. It was a great decision. He's a hell of a football player. And then he goes to Indiana. He needs to kind of prove something, I think, here of just, on the field against an opponent like Ohio State. But I think, for his future too, it's, hey, this is a really important game for him because the size is going to be a limiting factor. I think when you look at it, he didn't have a sack against Ohio State last year. He didn't have a sack against Notre Dame last year, 2 of their biggest games that they played. This is a big game for him. And I think he kind of needs to prove that, he can handle himself and that he can play well on a stage like this against an opponent like this. So Mikael Kamara, who has been good despite 1 sack number, I think needs to get some sacks on Saturday.
Stefan.
Player I have from Indiana is Carter Smith, their left tackle. I think he's a guy who's been awesome this year. He won Offensive Lineman of the Year. I kind of was looking at some of the numbers because I was surprised that Austin Sareveld wasn't a first-team selection for anyone. I think the coaches had him as a second team and the media had him as a third team. Maybe I have those flipped, but he was second and third team in some order. And Carter's, when I was looking at the numbers, I looked at some of Carter Smith's numbers, and 5 pressures allowed on the year is pretty stout. Right. And all the PFF grades suggest that. And this is, for guys in the trenches, you talk about Mikhail Kamara, for guys in the trenches, Ohio State is a big test for what's going to happen in the NFL, right? Like, I know Mendoza, NFL scouts are going to be watching very closely what he does against Ohio State's defense because that's the closest thing to an NFL defense. Carter Smith's going to be in charge of slowing down guys like Kenyatta Jackson and Arvell Reese and Caden Curry and Sonny Styles. Big test for him. I was looking at some of the mock drafts. There are some that have him kind of late first round. I think he's more likely to be, day 2 pick, somewhere late second, early third round. But you go out and you ball out against Arvell Reese and Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, your draft stock's only going to get better. So I think Carter Smith has a lot to prove in this game, or a lot to gain, I should say.
Ohio native too. Mine is D'Angelo Pons. I think it is criminal that he is not a Jim Thorpe Award finalist. We got to do better than that. It's LSU's Mansour Delane, who is the brother of Fahim Delane. So, Fahim, apparently it runs in the blood. So, let's see what you got next year. Caleb Downs and then Leonard Moore from Notre Dame, that cornerback. I think D'Angelo Pons might be the best cornerback in college football. What's his draft stock? I don't know about that. But last year when he lined up against Jeremiah Smith, JJ caught 1 ball. Last year, when he lined up against Carnell Tate caught 1 10-yard catch, and that was his only target in the game. Jeremiah Smith was 1 for 3. If he goes in there and does that again, not only is Ohio State potentially going to lose this game if he shuts one of those 2 guys down again, this is why we got to stop voting on the words so quickly, but it's just I think he has the most to gain because there is literal money for D'Angelo Pons to be made in this game. Because Ohio State has the best wide receiver tandem in the country. And depending on how Indiana decides to play this, regardless, he is going to spend a lot of time on one of these guys. Maybe they put him on Carnell and they double JJ, or they put him on JJ and they double Carnell. But he has already proven last year he can cover these guys. He can play with these guys one-on-one. And I think that's a challenge to JJ and Carnell. I think they want to have a better game against this guy than they had a year ago. And again, he played high school football with Jeremiah Smith and Kenyatta Jackson at Chaminade High School in South Florida. Stefan wrote a story about them. He talked to their head coach, so go read it on the site, cleveland.com/OSU. But I just think that this dude is a dude, man, and he's going to get a stage here to go up against some pretty special receivers and really show what he's made of. I think if he has a great day, I think he might turn some heads, especially on draft day. Gillis, Ohio State player with the most to gain.
It's me. I have the most to gain because I think it's Davis Igbinosun. This is a big rep game for me. This is a big reputation game for Andrew Gillis.
This is Gillis's national championship game.
Yeah, this is big. I saw somebody posted on Twitter today that they, it's kind of probably looking like a 2nd or a 3rd round grade for Davis Igbinosun right now, but this is a big game for him. Obviously, he's been very aggressive. And this is the best passing attack that Ohio State will have faced all year. And you talk about Cooper and Surratt and Fernando Mendoza and that trio. This is big. And this is a very, very important game because Davis Igbinosun is going to show up at the combine and test through the wazoo. He's 6'2". He's like 195 pounds. He's physical. He's aggressive. Like he's got incredibly long arms. He's got everything you want in a true lockdown number 1 corner. And this is the game to give you the film behind it. This is the game to go from this guy goes from 65th, 49th, 58th, something along those lines. This is that game from elevation of that to this dude's going 26th because some team is going to look at that and go, he shut down one of the best passing attacks in college football. And he had a really, really big part in Ohio State dominating Indiana. So Davis Igbinosun has a massive game ahead of him. And I think if he does have a massive game, I think people might be starting to see the light on 1st round Davis Igbinosun.
So Davison's reputation preceded itself last year, and
Mhm.
Indiana went after him for that sole purpose, and he ended the game with 3 penalties. So he's only got 5 on the year. So he's obviously been significantly better than last year, but I think we're all assuming that at some point Indiana's going to go. Let's just see if number 1 can get a little handsy or not. Stefan, player with the most to gain from the Bucks.
Mentioned this earlier when I interrupted Steven. I think it's Lorenzo Styles, right? He's a guy who he gets talked to. I say he's the defense's Tegra Shabola because he kind of gets talked about as like he gets picked on a little bit. He gets picked on a little bit because he's not as good as the superstars that are around him. But Lorenzo Styles has had a really good year in the same way that I thought Tegra Shabola played really well against Michigan. By the way, Tegra Shabola, like 3rd team All Big Ten on I think the media poll. So
as a person who votes in this, I would say with offensive line, I think the coaches know better than the media, especially just because it's hard, man. It's hard because if you don't know what you're looking at, it can be hard to do it. So, but yeah, he did make a 3rd team All Big Ten.
Yeah. So, anyways, I say Lorenzo is the defensive Tegra just because he kind of gets picked on. It's like I don't know. Will it actually end up costing him a game? This might be a game where it does, right? Omar Cooper, we've talked a lot about him. He's a star in this league. Maybe one of the 4 or 5 best receivers in the Big Ten. Everyone knows the catch that he had against Penn State. He's their slot guy, right? And I'm pretty sure he moved to the slot this year. He's been outstanding for them playing that role in this offense. So Lorenzo's going to get tested. He's going to get tested a ton, right? And if it's not working, they'll put Devin Sanchez out there and move Jermaine into the slot. They'll bring in Bryce West if they have. If he's getting tested, it's not working. You don't think they would make a change at some point in the game, Steven?
Just finish your thought.
Okay. You want young Jalen Ramsey to get his chances at an NFL stadium.
Just finish your thought. Just finish your thought. Okay.
The point here being that I think Lorenzo Styles is going to get tested a lot against Omar Cooper. And for someone who gets called out a ton and gets questioned a ton in terms of, his role in this defense, Lorenzo Styles is going to get tested. If he shows up, you can't question him going into the college football playoff.
I agree. Again, Cooper, 83% of his snaps are in the slot. He operates in that slot for them. And so this is a big game for him. I wasn't smiling because I want them to do that. That's not why I was smiling. So first, I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to do it very quickly because I know we've been on here for 90 minutes already. And we don't want to go 2 hours if people don't want us to go 2 hours. When I originally sent this, I also picked Davidson Igbenos and Gillis for the same reasons you did. I didn't think you were going to pick them because I thought you were going to overthink this. And we were going to come on here and make fun of you. And I was going to go, well, if you're not going to do it, then you're going to do it. So then when Brennan informed me that we had picked the same person, I texted him who my new guy was going to be. Go ahead and put him on the screen, Brennan. Go ahead and put him on the screen. Go ahead and put that boy on the screen. I'm going to tell you why, though. It's not just because I have a lot of faith in what his future is at Ohio State. They use him in a very specific package in like high leverage snaps. So this is not just like he's the 5-star cornerback. He's the number 1 cornerback. I think he's going to be good. No. They need him to do his job on Saturday, right? He played 11 snaps against Texas, who wants to throw the ball. He started against Illinois, who wants to throw the ball. He played 10 snaps against Washington, who threw it around a little bit. He played 16 snaps against Penn State, who threw it around a little bit. He played 15 snaps against Minnesota, who threw it around a little bit. Against Rutgers, he played 25 snaps. And I'm sure, I wish they had a meaningful snap versus total game snaps being in PFF, but I'm sure like half of those snaps were meaningful snaps. He only played 8 snaps against Michigan. That's the least amount of snaps he's played this year because Michigan doesn't do that. Michigan goes heavy, right? That was a big Peyton Pierce game. And it was also Ohio State was staying in base a lot. But there were only 2 true freshmen who played against Michigan on like offense or defense. Obviously, Riley Pettijohn played on special teams, but only 2 true freshmen played on offense and defense. It's Nate Roberts and it's Devin Sanchez. And it's because they have fundamental roles, defined roles in what they do offensively. Does Gillis like the fact that one of Nate Roberts' defined roles is fullback? No, he doesn't, but it's a defined role. 12 games in, this is Nate Roberts' job. They're going to play 5 tight ends, and when they go with the heavy packages, he's going to be a fullback. When they go dime look, Lorenzo Styles goes back to free safety alongside of Jalen McClain. Caleb Downs comes down as essentially another linebacker. Arvo Reese comes down to the edge, and Jermaine Matthews comes into the slot. And your outside corners are Davison Igbinosun and Devin Sanchez. You are insane if you don't think on the first 3rd and long, they're not going to try to attack the true freshman. Rutgers did it.
Yeah.
So this is, when I say most of the game, this isn't, oh, Devin Sanchez is going to leave this game and we're going to be going, oh, take him in the first round right now. But it's the most of the game because he might play 18 snaps on Saturday. He might play 20 snaps on Saturday just because Indiana likes to throw the ball around and they go with that dime look a little bit more, which means they're going to need him, which means that those 67 snaps against Illinois, time for those to pay off. The 28 against Wisconsin, time to pay off. The mistakes he made against UCLA and Rutgers that he can learn from, time for him to pay off. So that's why most to gain in terms of confidence, because he is still a true freshman and he's playing a very hard position to play. But also, what if he has a really good game? And it sets up a guy that we think is going to be a starting cornerback here in 12 months. So his role, because of the style of team they're playing, is that much more important. The same way that Peyton Pierce's role last Saturday became a little bit more important because of matching personnel. So that's all it is. But also, yeah, I think he's the next Jalen Ramsey. I can say that. Two things can be true.
Jalen Ramsey, former Jaguar, probably had some good games at Lucas Oil Stadium.
You know who else Jalen Ramsey used to play for? Tim Walton. Just saying. It's a lot of ball talk. That was great. Let's give some picks.
It's been a minute since we did some ball talk.
Man, it's just, we needed that. Our updated records: Stefan 12-0. I'm 12-0. Gillis is 11-1. I'm 11-1 against the spread because I'm a genius. Stefan is 10-2 against the spread because he's a little less of a genius than me, but he's still a genius. Andrew is Iowa against the spread. The over-under, none of us are good, but I'm just the worst of the bunch. 7-5 for Gillis and Stefan. 6-6 for me. I have 235 Buckeye Talk tokens. Gillis back over the 100 point after last week. Congratulations to you, back at 109. And Stefan at 172. And as a reminder, we start with 100. So we're all in the green right now. Ohio State is a 4-point favorite with a 47.5 over under. That's what when we decided to make these picks, that's where it was at. If it's changed since then, oh well, that's how lines do. Stefan, you were up first. What is your game score for the Big Ten championship?
Yeah, I have Ohio State winning this game 27-17. I think this is actually going to be kind of a defensive game, right? I think both these defenses are pretty stout. I think there's going to be maybe a bit of a feeling out period at the start of this game before the offenses really start humming. I think that highly of Indiana's defense, that I think they can cause some trouble for Julian Sayin and for this potent passing attack. And maybe I'm overstating it a little bit. Maybe I'm leaning into it too much. I just think D'Angelo Ponce is that good that when you have a corner who's that good, it can do wonders against a team that's so talented like Ohio State is at receiver, right? It just makes life so much easier for everyone else on Indiana's secondary if you have a guy who, those numbers said what they said last year about the way he was able to match up with Jeremiah and Carnell. But I think at some point, Ohio State will gain some momentum. Maybe there's a turnover or something that gives Ohio State some momentum, and they kind of stretch this out to a 2-possession game. And we see Ohio State go into, I kind of want to call it Ohio State mode now, where the Michigan game was just the perfect example of it, because we had leaned on the Texas game for so long as the example, but we knew that wasn't entirely Ohio State trusting Julian Sayin quite yet. I think the Michigan game was Ohio State trusting Julian Sayin, but still taking that Texas approach of, we know our defense will do what our defense does. And giving up 17 points is a lot for this defense to give up. So I trust Indiana's offense a little bit more than most offenses. But I just think there's an element to this game where Ohio State, maybe, you look at my 27-17, maybe it's 27-10. And Ohio State just kind of slows it down, runs some clock, relies on this defense. Indiana makes it, a 10-point game, at some point in the second half. But I just think that there is there's so much trust in what this defense can do that Ohio State will rely on that if they can get a bit of a lead, 2-possession lead in the second half. So a bit of a low-scoring affair considering how good both of these offenses are, I think. So I'm taking Ohio State to cover, and I'm taking the under, 27-17 Buckeyes. There's going to be a lot of people who watch this video and are not going to be happy when they text me.
They're going to call you a homer.
We have texters. The texters will be nice to me. So for every one text of me and Indiana fans, I'll have 100 happy Ohio State fans.
That'll work. Andrew, what's your game score?
Yeah, I have 31-20. Ohio State.
Wow.
Yeah, I think we do see some points. But I do think Indiana is able to do some stuff that we haven't seen Ohio State's defense give up this year. I think this was going to be a weird one. My official prediction, weird. I think this is going to be one of those games where we know that Ohio State's the better team. We're watching Ohio State be the better team. Indiana's still kind of maybe annoyingly close to Ohio State for some fans. Like, you're kind of looking at it. I wonder if you're at a point where it's Ohio State's up 17-10, but it feels like they've kind of dominated. Like, I wonder if we get that same feeling of Cotton Bowl versus Texas, where we're watching the game going like, Ohio State's the better team. Why is there not a greater point differential here? And I wonder if we're at that point. But I mean, look, Indiana's really good. And Indiana has, I think, a certain pluckiness maybe that is going to define them in this game to where they will keep it close. I do think Ohio State's going to pull away later as the game goes on. Indiana's a great team, but I just Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, that run game being what it is right now, like that's a different beast than what Indiana has seen all year. So I do think Ohio State pulls away late. I do think Indiana keeps it close for a time, but I do think we leave this game thinking to ourselves, Ohio State's definitely the best team in the country. And I don't want to give too much away considering what's down the pipe. I think this might be the first of what ends up as being 4 straight double-digit wins for Ohio State. So I think Ohio State wins by 11 at Lucas Oil Stadium, and they win the Big Ten. And Ohio State gets through this 13-0, and they go to the Rose Bowl on January 1st.
4 straight double-digit wins. By your math, it'd be 15. Yeah,
well, that's true.
10 points since week 1. I love how we just did 2 hours, and it was great. I loved everything that we did. And then you guys gave scores, and then your scores, you guys went, I think, Gillis, you used the word plucky when describing the Indiana team. We immediately reverted back to one of these teams is significantly more talented than the other football team. My score is 41-14. And it's, you said, Gillis, what if this game is like the Cotton Bowl from Texas? Or if it's like the Rose Bowl from Oregon? Did we walk away from that game thinking Oregon wasn't a talented team and wasn't one of the best teams in the country? No. We walked away thinking, oh, Ohio State's just on a warpath and nobody's stopping this team. So my 41-14 score isn't because I don't think Indiana is good. I think last year, 38-15, Indiana was a little fraudulent. I don't think if they lose 41-14 this year, it's because Indiana is fraudulent. It's just because I can't spend 3 months talking about this Ohio State team the way I've talked about them and then shy off of that now that they're playing a good football team. I genuinely think that there is a sizable gap between Ohio State and the rest of the country right now, which is why even nationally the conversation has shifted from like championship talks to do you take Ohio State on the field? Indiana's undefeated too. Indiana is averaging 44 points a game and only giving up 11 points a game this year. They've been just as dominant against their opponents as Ohio State has been. But we're not going Ohio State, Indiana, or the field. Indiana gets lumped in with the field. The reason why Ohio State has been number one in every single ranking other than one, and they've been number one in every single ranking, isn't just because they're undefeated. It's because the committee told us after week one that they looked at Ohio State and said, yeah, that team's the best team. They're passing the eye test as much as they are just like winning football games and having a resume. And I think I have that wrong, Brennan. I think it's the over. But listen, we all make mistakes. I sent it to you that way, so I make the mistakes and it happens. I'm taking the over. I don't feel confident about the over, and it's because we all know how Ohio State is. They like to cover, but then also get the under. But I'm making a point here of Ohio State indoors, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. They let us see the receivers Wednesday evening. They haven't let us see the receivers in like 3 weeks. And Ohio State indoors is a different monster, man. And I think Indiana might take its best punches at some times. And I think they might score multiple touchdowns, which somebody has not scored multiple touchdowns on Ohio State's starting defense all season. I think Indiana will do that. I think Indiana is good. I think their defense is good, but I also think their numbers don't tell the whole story of part of the reason why they've been beating teams 44-11 this season. And I think they're going to run into another situation where it's like, yeah, Oregon, good win. They're not Ohio State. Illinois, good win. They're not Ohio State. Iowa, good win. They're not Ohio State. And I think everybody else in the country is very good, but they're not Ohio State. And I think this is where that starts. I think right now the concept of how good Ohio State is like in theory, and to Gillis' point, I think they might spend the next 2 months showing you just how much better they are than everybody else, which is why they played so slow for 12 games. So that now they can start ramping it up. And it doesn't mean they're going to be going 95 miles per hour. It just means instead of winning a game 33-10, they win it 41-14. Good season, though, Indiana. And I think you're the second best team in college football. I just think number 2 is a little closer to number 3, and there is a wide gap in between where number 1 and where number 2 are. Those are our game scores. We're all picking Ohio State to cover. I'm taking the over. Gillis is taking the over. Stefan's taking the under. I guess we'll find out on Saturday as we head back to Indianapolis. This will be your guys' first trip to Indianapolis, though. Have you guys ever been to Lucas for a football game before?
No.
Yeah, I watched Tom Brady's Buccaneers play there once.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Seen the combine, seen media days. Never seen a football game.
Yeah, actually, I also watched the Bears there last year. I forgot I went to that as well. I've been to Lucas Oil a couple of times. Go Bears, by the way. Beat the team up north this week.
I just don't know what to do with that. Okay, get the text. 614-350-3315. Watching Bears games if you don't have the text, you should. Oh, yes. Yeah, this is true. This is true information. You will find out quicker because you don't have to go searching for it. We'll bring it to you. 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. And that's not me telling you. That's a consumer.
That's the best endorsement we've ever had.
Not a burner. Not a burner.
Not a burner.
It didn't come from us, and it was really good.
No phone. Go get the text. This is a good time to get it, man. Listen, I don't know if anybody has a clear vision of when Chris Henry Jr. is going to make a decision or where he's going to go. Obviously, it's Ohio State, Oregon, and I'm sure it'll keep bouncing back and forth who has momentum. But when that information comes out, you're going to get a text that says, it's Andrew. 5-star wide receiver Chris Henry has signed with insert whatever school it is. You don't have to go to Twitter. You don't got to go Google it. You don't got to turn your TV on. The notification is going to come to your phone. That plus everything else under the sun that has happened. When Brian Hartline, the news broke that he was going to head to South Florida, guess where it was? In your phone. When Stefan got a new press release from the Big Ten about what the heck was going on with the equipment, it was in your phone. When we were sitting there talking with Mark Pantoni and Ryan Day, in your phone. You didn't even have to watch the Big Ten show about who was getting the awards. That was in your phone too. And everything else that you possibly could need as an Ohio State football player in your phone.
Football fan.
Even Legend Day, as somebody brought up. When he flipped back to Tennessee, it was in your phone. It's a 2-week free trial. $3.99 after that. 614-350-3315. Ohio State, Indiana for the Big Ten championship, for potentially the Heisman Trophy between Julian Sand and Fernando Mendoza for the number 1 seed in the 2025 college football playoff. Whew! It was 2 hours of ball talk. It's been a long time coming, but we finally got there. No big picture stuff, just ball talk. For Stefan, for Andrew, and for producer Brennan, I'm Steven. Thank you all for joining the live show. Talk to you guys later.